stood in amazement as I peered through the lattice into the throne room. At the far end of a gleaming expanse of polished marble stood an elaborate throne. It was fashioned from ivory and gold, and it was set with sapphires, rubies, emeralds, and other precious stones that shone with dazzling brilliance. 6 steps led up to it, and at either end of each step stood a splendid golden statue of an animal. Beside the throne, on the left and on the right, were 2 golden chairs, upon which sat the high priest and the assistant high priest. Surrounding it were 70 more such chairs, upon which sat the 70 elders of the court. Above all of this was an enormous canopy made from 12 entwined golden vines. The women knew that soon they would enter this room to appear before the king and receive his judgment on the dispute between them. One woman held a baby in her arms, and she kept it well away from the other woman, who looked upon it with the longing that comes from a mother's heart. As they wondered at the splendor, trumpets began to sound, and the men sitting on the golden chairs rose as one man. At the side of the room, 2 golden doors opened, and the king, flanked on every side by a band of guards, entered the room. The guards were all tall, handsome, and powerful. They were superbly dressed and marched in perfect time to the music that accompanied the procession. The king, everyone in the room, bowed before the king as he ascended the steps to the throne. He was dressed in gorgeous apparel, resplendent with exquisite, colorful embroidery, worked from silk threads, fine jewels, and gold. A magnificent golden crown sat upon his head. This was King Solomon, the great king of Israel, whose name was acclaimed throughout the entire world. The guards took their places around the room, ever alert to any danger that might appear. But it was all peaceful in King Solomon's presence. When he was seated on his throne, the elders and the priests took their seats again, and the proceedings began. This was a time when the king's people were able to plead their causes before him. One by one, groups of citizens approached the bottom of the steps and stated their cases. And one by one, disputes were resolved as the king gave his judgment. People left his presence vindicated or shamed, elated or cast down. But whatever the result, they had to accept it. No one argued with the king. The 2 women watched until finally it was their turn to approach the throne. When told to begin, the woman without the baby spoke. "Oh, my lord, this woman and I live together in the same house. Some time ago I gave birth to a baby boy while she was with me in the house. Then 3 days later she also gave birth to a son. No one else was with us in the house. One night her baby died because she lay upon it. But when she saw what had happened, she took my son from beside me while I slept and put her son in his place. When I rose in the morning to nurse my son, the child beside me was dead, but I knew it wasn't mine." She had no sooner finished her explanation when the other woman cried out, "No, she lies! This son is mine. This is my son. Her son is dead." And the other woman said, "No, my lord, I tell the truth. Hers is the dead child, mine is the living." And so they argued before the king until they were told to be silent. There was hush over the room as the king sat quietly looking at the two women. The woman with the baby looked away when he turned his gaze upon her. She felt uncomfortable. She wasn't going to let him see it in her eyes. But the other woman looked steadily forward. Her anguish was clear in her eyes, and she pleaded with them as she silently prayed he would understand. She knew his decision would be final. Would he rule in her favor, or was she to lose her child forever? At last the king spoke. The one says, "This child is mine, and the other woman's child is dead." And the other one says, "No, but her child is dead, and mine is the living." How can we tell which is speaking the truth? Then the king turned to one of his guards and said, "Bring me a sword." And so he brought him a sword. And then he said, "Divide the living child in two and give half to one and half to the other." A gasp escaped the lips of everyone who was present. The guard stood motionless, feeling sure he had misunderstood the command. The woman without the baby fell down before the king and cried, "Oh, my lord, give her the child, and by no means kill him," for she feared for her son. But the other woman said, "Yes, divide him. Then he will be neither hers nor mine." At that the king's command rang out, "Let the child live, and give him to the first woman. She is his mother." The baby was taken from the woman who held him and placed into the arms of his true mother. She kissed him gently as tears flowed down her face. The other woman glared at the king, turned in anger, and fled from the room. The shock had been acute in the throne room that day. When the king's command was made, murmurs of relief, joy, and amazement rippled through the room. News of the occurrence spread quickly, and the Bible record tells us that all Israel heard of the judgment which the king had rendered, and they feared the king, for they saw that the wisdom of God was in him to administer justice.